Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asbantium level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. So recently we got news about a brand new Doctor Who behind the scenes show named Doctor Who Unleashed. A big new companion series exploring the making of every new episode of Doctor Who, starting with the 60th anniversary specials in November 2023. It's set to be an insightful show with all sorts of interviews and behind the scenes footage, which naturally reminded me of the first time Doctor Who had such a show. As part of Doctor Who's return in 2005, Doctor Who Confidential was a BBC Three show airing alongside each new episode of the main series, diving deep into their production and everything that went into them. It's a show I remember fondly, and I guess it was one of the first dominoes leading to this entire channel. So to celebrate the announcement of Doctor Who Unleashed, I thought it would be the perfect time to explore the history of Confidential, what made it so good, why it died, and why I'm so happy it's back in this new form. So grab a clapperboard, pull up the director's chair, and get ready to travel back to 2005, because this is the rise and fall of Doctor Who Confidential. It's no secret that Doctor Who's first season was plagued with issues. From filming on a shoestring budget in a tiny studio that would overheat and set off sprinklers, to constant technical issues and script shortages, the deck was stacked against the fledgling show from the very beginning. After a disastrous unaired pilot episode and a mediocre first serial, Doctor Who would have died if it wasn't for the completely unexpected success of the Daleks. Monsters that, again, shouldn't have even really been in the purely educational show creator Sidney Newman had dreamed up. It was a stroke of luck against all the odds, and Doctor Who would become the little show that could. Verity Lambert and her production team had to create striking landscape and villains on a nearly weekly basis with almost no turnaround and time for error, along with that shoestring budget I had already alluded to. Even the now iconic TARDIS interior was just kind of thrown together unenthusiastically. The BBC had high expectations for Doctor Who, but didn't give it nearly the support it needed, so the team had to really push their creativity and imagination to the limit. Take the famous theme music for example, which was incredibly experimental, and the iconic TARDIS noise, which was made with keys. How about the title sequence, which was achieved by pointing two cameras at each other? Doctor Who was always innovated out of necessity, but in the early days a lot of these innovations and production issues were largely unseen by the majority of viewers. They had no idea how the magic was made, so there were a lot of unsung heroes waiting for their turn in the limelight. It was really in the 1970s that Doctor Who's production began to open up more. As the show became more and more prominent, it was trusted with better facilities and a higher budget, so the curtain began to be pulled back a bit more. The show's production was regularly showcased on things like Blue Peter and Pebble Mill at 1, giving viewers a peek at how the talented production team brought the show to life. The most notable of these is the 1977 hour-long documentary Who's Doctor Who, which is an incredibly in-depth look at the show, its cultural impact, and its production. I feel like this is the first true predecessor of Confidential, with a similar structure of pulling back the curtain with exclusive behind-the-scenes content like prop making, script reading, and genuine, frank interviews with cast and crew, shedding new light on the extent work that went into the show, such as Tom Baker even admitting to clashes between himself and the writers on how best to write the Fourth Doctor. And much like Confidential will later do, it explores the wider footprint of the show, examining its impact on families, fans, and people like teachers and psychologists, all contributing their own opinions and connections to the show. By 1977, media literacy was already rapidly increasing compared to 1963. Audiences were a lot more aware of how these productions were actually made, but rather than the magic being diminished and the show losing its appeal, these behind the scenes glimpses actually gave children the ability to dream of working on the show itself. The production team weren't infallible gods with skills impossible to attain. They were regular people who had honed their skills much like any other career. Documentaries like Who's Doctor Who and books like 1972's The Making of Doctor Who clearly had a long-lasting impact on a whole generation of kids who would then go on to pursue jobs in film and TV. It was a way to inspire and encourage fans to engage with the show further, and it clearly worked, especially when fans would indeed start to write for Doctor Who, including Andrew Smith, who wrote Full Circle at just 17 years old, the youngest writer of any episode in the show's long, extensive history. Fan involvement in media is always a bit of a double-edged sword, but it can definitely pose significant benefits to the longevity of said media. As Doctor Who continued to air throughout the 70s and 80s, fans were growing more and more involved and were congregating at meetups and conventions, helping to develop a community around the show and, giving it a dedicated following. This also coincided with that growing media literacy as more channels and shows were added to TV, broadening the landscape and further growing the medium, with Doctor Who maintaining its regular regular behind the scenes glimpses. By cultivating this audience and inspiring them to explore the production of the show itself, Doctor Who had unknowingly given itself an almost infinite lifespan. Even when it was cancelled, it had gathered enough talented fans that the property survived through the 90s and early 2000s. Figures like Bill Baggs, Nicholas Briggs, Stephen Moffat, Mark Gatiss and Russell T Davies keeping the show alive in their own distinct ways. Whether it was cameos in successful new shows, comedy sketches, official novels, or dedicated licensed audiovisual productions, Doctor Who survived because it had fostered such an imaginative, proactive fanbase. Novels would thrive and the old stories would be released on VHS and DVD, complete with extra features continuing to show the names and faces behind them. These specific making-of documentaries revealing new information about key decisions, showing how iconic moments were crafted, and allowing the writers and actors to add their own context. Much like Who's Doctor Who, it opens the show up to be appreciated even more. Doctor Who hadn't ruined the magic of the show by revealing the secrets of how it was made. It just passed on that magic to a whole new generation who had grown up dreaming of being involved in their favourite little show that could. And that takes us back to 2005, when one of these imaginative fans managed to resurrect the show in its entirety. Russell T Davies has started and polished his career during Doctor Who's so-called wilderness years, so he had the right amount of clout and leverage to get the show going again, along with ensuring it would be in the hands of the fans. Something that's clear of his hiring of writers like Moffat, Gatiss, Robert Shearman and Paul Cornell, all names who had written at least one piece of published Doctor Who media during the wilderness years. Davies' vision of Doctor Who emphasised this idea of it being fan-led, placing the key decisions in the hands of the people who actually knew what made the show special, unlike the chaotic stop-start production of the 1996 movie, which saw a tug-of-war between fans in power and executives who wanted to change literally everything for the sake of it. And during all that time off, the wider media landscape had also changed dramatically. The internet had risen to prominence and suddenly everything felt a lot more connected. You could log onto forums and scrutinise even the blurriest of filming pictures snapped by someone hiding behind a dumpster with a Nokia 7650. Making of documentaries and behind the scenes features had become an expected part of media, rather than just special treats like they were back in the 70s or the 80s. There was no longer the illusion of a boundary between the viewers and the shows themselves. The world has shifted to a more postmodern media landscape where people actively wanted to see how the magic was made. They didn't care if it ruined how special it seemed. Audiences in the 20th century were more passive, simply consuming media without engaging too heavily. Sure, you'd watch your favourite TV show, laugh, cry, shout, hide behind the sofa, but then when it finished, you would just go about your day and, rarely think about it again until the next episode. However, active audiences engage more. They seek out other fans, write fan mail to actors, look for behind the scenes news and leaks, you get the gist. The turn of the millennium saw a rise in what is often called postmodernism, which is a media theory that explores the audience's growing relationship with how media is created. A prime example of this is the astonishing increase in media that breaks the fourth wall, because everyone now knows when they're watching a movie. They know what a movie is, they understand the characters are simply actors, and everything has been constructed for the audience's enjoyment. It kind of goes along with how kids are working out Santa's not real earlier and earlier, but that doesn't stop them enjoying Christmas. It's now up to us as an active audience to choose whether we want to suspend our disbelief or not, and I think that's where Doctor Who Confidential was ahead of its time. It was a purely supplemental piece of media on a different channel to the main show. If learning how the episode was made would ruin it for you, you were under no obligation to watch Confidential. However, if you did, you had an entire behind the scenes documentary almost as long as every single episode itself. Doctor Who Confidential was an invitation. It was the production team's way of saying, hey, want to see just how hard we work to entertain you? It was like being brought into the inner circle to see the magic of filmmaking. I was 5 years old when I sat down with my family on Saturday the 26th of March 2005 to watch Doctor Who. Little did I know that would be one of the most important decisions in my entire life, but I just wanted to mention it because I was part of the target audience for Doctor Who and Doctor Who Confidential, so I can personally attest to the value it had as a supplemental series alongside the show itself. There was a unique magic in watching an episode, being in awe of a certain sequence or visual, and then excitedly tuning over to BBC Three and learning how it was done. It never stopped the show feeling real, it simply made me appreciate it all the more. I distinctly remember seeing the Confidential episode about the Lazarus experiment and seeing David Tennant jump onto a mat. It was the first time I realised how that kind of stunt work was done. I was old enough to properly process it and understand the camera trickery making it seem like he hits the floor. Moments like these were enlightening to me, introducing me to all these concepts in a snappy and entertaining way. Confidential knew exactly how long to focus on any given scene or topic, never dwelling too long and boring you with unnecessary details. It always showed you exactly what you needed to see, and the talking heads added a lot of important context, providing the thoughts of the writers and actors themselves. We got to truly understand why Russell wrote a scene the way he did, or why Eccleston or Piper acted the way they did. It's the kind of thing you'd usually only see at a convention panel or in a DVD extra, but this was being broadcast alongside the episode at no extra cost, opening up so many people to the construction of a TV show because it was so accessible and audience friendly. Think of it this way, what would you rather have as a lesson? Do you want to sit there as a bored teacher recites the same basic media theories they've been teaching for years? Do you want to be given a list of character names and aliens and be expected to memorize it all to earn your title of being a fan? Or would you rather learn those media theories through created examples of your favourite show, combined with interesting side features revealing the history of Doctor Who to drip feed you the importance and significance of past characters and monsters? If it's not already obvious, I know what I'd rather have. Confidential was never meant as some sort of tell-all documentary dredging up the dirty secrets or detailing clashes behind the scenes. No, instead it was a child-friendly exploration of media production, never patronising them and guiding them through such an alien world by using familiar faces and popular music to keep you engaged and, actually helping you to absorb the information. I mentioned earlier that I essentially grew up alongside Confidential. For 6 years of my life, I saw almost every single episode every single week and unconsciously learned all these things about how to make media. I wouldn't have been interested if it was anything other than Doctor Who. In my videos, I always like to reference a certain Confidential clip where Eccleston says it's important to give the children good media when they're young, so they expect a higher quality of media when they're older. And I think Confidential was itself a way of doing this. By exposing a whole new generation to every aspect of media production, it taught children how much effort and love needs to be put into something to make it good. We saw actors waiting for 5 hours in a trailer to be turned into a realist monster for like a 2-minute scene. We saw the cast and crew suffering in a Welsh quarry in the early hours of a winter morning. Yes, Confidential was still sanitised for us, but we did get to see the trials and tribulations, which makes us appreciate the media even more. So Confidential was an invaluable tool for 6 years, inviting fans both new and old into the world of Doctor Who as a wider franchise and a community. It was a vital show for both the success of Doctor Who itself, but also stimulating those imaginations and that creativity by breaking down the walls between media and consumer. So what went wrong? Why isn't it around anymore? Well, it's the answer you probably expect. Money. In September 2011, it was announced that Confidential would be cancelled as part of budget cuts to BBC Three, with Series 6 serving as the last run of behind-the-scenes episodes. Now, this is where things might get a little bit controversial because of rose-tinted glasses, because while yes, Confidential was special, by 2011 it had become a shadow of its former self. Things had drifted away from the original intention to educate and teach viewers about the show's production. Instead, we had things like Arthur Darvill swimming with sharks and Karen Gillan learning how to drive. While these were interesting ways to engage with the actors, they weren't really relevant to The Girl Who Waited, the episode the piece accompanied. The fluffing and padding had started to diminish the actual interesting stuff, but it still felt unfair to outright cancel the show, especially when ratings and interest in Doctor Who itself were still fairly high. In the 12 years that followed, nothing would come close to the level of in-depth information and analysis Confidential had provided. Doctor Who Extra was the show's digital-only successor, but these were really short, condensed, pointless videos in comparison, and they only ever really focused on 1 or 2 scenes with very general and vague talking head interviews. There was no real in-depth exploration of how things were made. Everything essentially went backwards, all the interest and behind-the-scenes stuff once more being tucked away in DVD and Blu-ray menus. You could tell there was still a passion for making some kind of behind-the-scenes content, but it could never hold a candle to the incredibly audience-friendly, accessible Confidential. Because you didn't need a DVD player or a Blu-ray player or money to buy DVDs. As long as you paid your license fee, you had Confidential essentially free of charge. So pretty much anyone could access it regardless of their class or what they earned. It was a very easy way to follow media production. But locking everything behind DVDs and Blu-rays just made it so much harder to access for the child demographic. You see, Confidential wasn't just a documentary series. It wasn't dry and overly factual. It tapped into things like popular music to set the tone and keep you engaged. It used pretty much any even remotely relevant song it could use, and it did a great job at connecting Doctor Who to the wider pop culture sphere, even if it made it impossible to ever re-release episodes in their entirety. A little less conversation, feeling good, I predict a riot. Hell, they even threw in all the small things at one point. It acts as a tether of sorts to the rest of the world, maintaining an almost voyeuristic sense of seeing behind the curtain of something, you know, that's so detached from the alienness of Doctor Who. And of course, this use of music was also notable for one big reason. It made vidding canon. If you don't know what vidding is, you do, you just don't know it was called that. You know all those old anime music videos you see where people put like Dragon Ball footage to Skillet or Supernatural shipping clips to some emotional white girl summer ballad? Yeah, that's vidding, editing clips together to make your own music video out of an existing property. And Doctor Who Confidential loved doing this on national TV, mainly whenever there was a big departure. It's almost surreal to watch an episode of Confidential only to be hit with an emotional 10 Rose montage because, you know, Rose left in the episode, or a nearly 3-minute continuous edit of Run by Snow Patrol recapping the Ninth Doctor's best moments at the end of Series 1. And hey look, I'm a grown-ass man, I can admit these montages still make me tear up a little bit, and I know you cry too, don't you dare lie to me. These may be a time capsule to a very different time period where these things were a little bit less cringe, but there's something so pure and sincere about them in Confidential, really capitalising on the relationships the audience formed with these characters. The production team knew you'd care about these character exits, they wanted you to care, so Confidential's lack of kayfabe allowed them to pay homage in truly emotional ways, condensing down these journeys and reminding you of their legacy. Honestly, given they started this stuff back in 2005, I'm convinced a real time traveller was the one who made them do it, because they were so ahead of the curve and on the pulse when it came to vidding and AMVs. Like, I don't see The Mandalorian or The Last of Us ever getting away with that. Yes, now let's kind of ease back up to present day, 2023, when we're soon going to be graced with Doctor Who Unleashed. We still don't know enough details yet to see how close it will be to Doctor Who Confidential. It shares home on BBC 3 and it has a nice lengthy runtime of 30 minutes, so it's already closer to Confidential than Doctor Who Extra ever could be, but it seems clear that there will be outright differences, namely a physical host in Stefan Powell. Confidential never really had a host, it more just bounced from segment to segment with helpful narration from people such as Simon Pegg, Anthony Head, Mark Gatiss, and some guy named David Tennant? Never heard of him. If I had to speculate, I'd probably guess that Unleashed might be presented in an almost talk show format akin to modern behind the scenes after shows like The Talking Dead, The Ready Room and Talking Smack, where there's a studio set with a presenter bringing on guests and cutting to behind the scenes segments every now and then. It's not necessarily a format I like, I think it would be a bit too dry and talk heavy to appeal to the younger audience, but I only speculate it will be this way because that's the current main format for such shows. For all I know, Russell will revolutionise the format all over again. But regardless of the format, the intent behind the show remains the same as Confidential, with the returning showrunner being quoted as saying, "So a whole new generation and faithful fans of old can see what the stars and crew get up to behind the cameras." So I think we're in good hands, especially because, you know, he was the driving force behind Confidential the first time round. Doctor Who Confidential will always hold a very special place in my heart. From genuinely insightful scene breakdowns to emotionally charged montages causing breakdowns, it really was the perfect behind the scenes after show for Doctor Who fans young and old. It perfectly bridged that generational gap by appealing to every age without it ever being patronising, and that's something almost impossible to replicate. Doctor Who was built on experimentation and pushing boundaries to make the most of limitations. Ever since 1963, the show has been crafted with a sense of passion, ambition, and a solid heaping of luck. It's still a show that makes the most of whatever it's given, with so many advancements and innovations that deserve to be showcased. By granting fans access to the inner workings of Doctor Who, the BBC created so many writers, directors, prop designers, makeup artists, the list goes on. Russell T Davies himself admitted in the Unleashed announcement that he's always meeting people who are inspired to pursue their TV careers because of the BBC's behind the scenes materials. As a kid growing up with Doctor Who, Confidential was a show that not only allowed me to see more of my favourite universe by introducing me to its extensive past, but it also gave me a powerful understanding of media production as a whole, and the interviews helped me understand deeper character motivations, with the actors and writers really breaking down who the characters are at their core and what they feel during any given moment. That character-based analysis is pretty much what I've based my channel around. It's what I always tend to focus when it comes to reviews and essays, or even writing my own fiction. So I feel like I have Confidential to thank for that. I can personally attest to Doctor Who Confidential's ability to inspire and educate beyond the franchise itself. All these passionate and skilled professionals teaching us the basics and inviting us to follow in their footsteps. And I really think Doctor Who has been lacking that kind of generational fan approach over the last decade by limiting its behind the scenes access to purely DVD extras or obscure YouTube videos. So speaking as a product of Doctor Who Confidential, I hope Unleashed can continue that legacy and introduce a whole new generation to the magic of filmmaking, even if it won't have any shipping AMVs broadcast on national television. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye bye. And I'd just like to thank my Asbantium level patrons, Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Diamond level patron Glenna Clark, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nix Games, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Daniel Shillito, Franzorn aka Line Vortex, Robert Hock, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.